Hey folks, I thought I'd do a video on old wood stoves versus new wood stoves. I've been on a couple of forums and a bunch of people are chiming in the older stoves are the way to go. They were much better built back then, etc., etc. And that really is just not the case. So let's first talk about the main differences between the two. And I'm going to go to compare pre-1988 stoves. 1988 was when the first EPA put regulations on wood stoves, and prior to 1988 there were literally hundreds of wood stove manufacturers all over the US. And so I'm looking for about that range because most of the used wood stoves that I see, the old ones, they're 1980s wood stoves. There's, I don't think we need to go back to turn of the century like 1900, but there's quite a few of those on the market as well. But basically, the most efficient you had was up to 1988. So you can take this knowledge as far as efficiency goes. The older you go back, the worse the efficiency gets because they're less and less airtight. I have two wood stoves. This is a Hearthstone Clydesdale as well, and it's catalytic. And I also have a Hearthstone Manchester that's pre-catalytic. So the efficiency on both of those stoves is around 78%. This stove replaced my Ember Hearth, which was about a 50% efficient stove. The reason it was 50 is it was one of the rare stoves that actually had a secondary air intake, so you can get some secondary combustion. But of course, that secondary combustion only works as well as the stove was designed. So it had one tube running through the center of the stove, and like I said, that's about 10% more heat than you get out of a regular wood stove of that era. But it only had a single top plate of steel. This stove actually has 3 ceilings plus a surround. The surround is for when you have the fan on, it carries over and out these baffles. So it actually takes all the heat that's on the outermost layer of the stove. The 3 ceilings in this stove consist of, the first ceiling is a ceramic baffle, and what that does is it heats up and reflects heat down, as well as it gets really warm and allows secondary combustion to occur. There are vents way back. Let me open up the bypass and see if we can see. Way in the back there's a plate with a bunch of air holes. And what happens is the secondary combustion occurs, and it comes and it brings that heat all along those baffles and then up through the front. Once it hits the front, it curls around past the baffles and goes to the catalytic converters, which are located on each corner. And it's a cast iron housing. So you're getting the heat coming in and heating up that first plate of cast iron, goes through the catalytic converters. Those burn extra fuel and they heat up the next layer of cast iron, and then the air travels, and the hot gases travel from the catalytic converters to the center and up the chimney. So hopefully I made that clear. So there's a lot of ways that this thing can capture heat as opposed to just going right up the chimney. So how can a wood stove that, for the sake of argument, we'll say my old stove was 48% efficient and this new stove is 78%. How can a stove that's 30% less efficient, how can it use double the amount of wood? And the secret lies with the cold air intake. This thing has to pull air from the house, which invariably is replaced with air from the outside. So the more you burn, you're bringing in cold air into your house. So that, and those old stoves with, they had a lot of capacity to pull in a lot of air. There wasn't any restrictions. They had a damper, but you could really, really put in a roaring fire. But that's not always doing yourself favors. So they used a lot more wood because you were having to heat a lot of the air that the wood stove itself was consuming. So less wood equals less cost to operate. So this new wood stove uses half. So it cut, now we harvest our own wood, but it's a lot less work. We don't have to spend a week harvesting firewood. We can get our firewood put up in about a day. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is safety. So these new wood stoves are more chimney fire resistant. The reason they're more chimney fire resistant is they're cleaner burning. They don't put a lot of junk up through the chimney stack. That's the first thing. The second thing is they're airtight. When you've got that door shut, they have, the only control is right here in the front. There's no damper. Instead, the whole thing being airtight, this is the only thing that controls the amount of air going in. And they are set specifically on the low side. So when you go to start a fire, it's actually, you typically have to do that with the door cracked. A lot of people complain about that because they don't know how to do it. You know, you just can't just, like the old wood stoves, you just can't just easily get a fire going. Once you learn a couple of tricks, mainly having the door cracked and make sure that you've got a good fire rolling, and then you can shut the door, you know, it's just a learning curve. So so you have the air intake control only. So there's not a lot of stuff going up the chimney that would ignite, as well as there's not a lot of air after you get through the combustion in the main chamber and then through the catalytic converters and, well, actually the secondary combustion and then the catalytic converters. There's not a lot of air left for a chimney fire. So that's a really good thing. So those are the two really, really good things, but let's talk about some of the bad things of the new ones. The bad, this applies if you've got catalytic converters. So catalytic converters, they are finicky. You have, there's two thermometers on this stove. There's one here that I stuck, it's kind of a guide, and then there's one deep in that actually tells me what the converter range is and when I should engage it. This one I use as a guide so I don't have to get a flashlight. Unfortunately, it's so far in there. You see, I keep a flashlight up here. And there's the actual, it's about midway right now. It's way back in there is the little thermometer that tells me when it's safe to have the bypass closed for the catalytic converters. So if you got one of the new stoves with catalytic converters, they require a little more operational knowledge and a little more observation. Not that they're it's just one of those things you're going to have to learn. There's a little bit of a learning curve to figure out how much wood, if you say you want to go to bed but you don't want to have to worry about the stove getting too hot, you kind of learn how much wood you can put in it before you go to sleep, that sort of thing. And that's the biggest downside to the catalytic converters. But there are some stoves out there that do not have catalytic converters and still meet the new EPA guidance regulations. So the last thing, we're going to go back to the good. If you do replace your stove, right now there is a 30% tax credit that you can get up to $2,000 for replacing your stove. That's why we took our old Ember hearth out and replaced it with this Clydesdale. The new stoves, which brings us back to the bad, the new stoves, a good one is they are expensive. Expect to pay about $5,000 for a good stove. You can get by with a cheaper stove, but it's not going to last long. I want something that's going to last decades, not 5 years or 10 years. So I wanted cast iron and soapstone. So anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video, and please like and subscribe.